Exclusive content, insightful analysis. Join the conservatives at RightWisconsin.com.
Me this week from Media Trackers, Brian Sikma. Brian, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Brian. Good to see you.
Good to be seen. And from Right Wisconsin, my associate editor, Collin Roth. Collin, welcome.
Hi, Brian.
Well, let's get right to it. Charlie Sykes is off this week, but that doesn't stop us from doing the Right Wisconsin Week in Review. The first topic: two of the three largest health insurers in Wisconsin, have said no and are taking a pass on participating in the Obamacare exchanges. Brian, is that a surprise, and what do you think that says about the Obamacare reform?
Well, it's hard to say it's a surprise, Brian. When the Obamacare was passed, we were told that we'd have to wait until the bill passes before we find out everything that's in it. It is a stunning blow, and I think it is something that people in Wisconsin should be concerned about. The president said when the bill passed that if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. If you like your insurance plan, you can keep your insurance plan. Well, that's not the case. And instead of that being the hope and change that was promised in 2008, that's turning out to be more smoke and mirrors for the people of Wisconsin, with these two large insurance companies now announcing that they're not going to be part of the market here in Wisconsin.
Now, Collin, Wisconsin isn't alone. This is happening in other states as well, correct?
That's correct. And it's yet to be seen that this is Obamacare. This is the uncertainty that we've been talking about, in which people don't know, are they going to lose their plan? Are they going to have to switch their plan? This is the type of stuff that conservatives and Obamacare critics have been warning about that's coming down the line, and it's here in Wisconsin now.
Well, I have a theory on this, actually. I believe that this is all part of the plan, frankly. I believe that this is designed to basically create a situation where this isn't an insurance product. So insurance companies won't offer the product because they don't know how to deal with this. So there'll be so few choices available eventually, even though there's 13 companies right now. I think there will be so few choices available to the American public that the government will step in, the benevolent government, and say, we are here to fix things, as if this was designed to fail to lead us toward universal single-payer coverage. Brian, have you gotten any of that kind of feedback across the country too?
I think that's the case. I mean, this is going to be a very complex system. I even know for myself, my own health insurance, we're having to go through, I have to fill out more forms now so that we're complying with the Department of Labor forms requiring that the employees fill out certain information and submitting that to Obamacare so the administration can know what's going on. There's just a lot of complexity that's involved here. It's not a reduced, clear-cut thing right now, and people are upset. People are frustrated. They want to know what's going to happen. Now, was this a great promise when it started? Sure, it sounded great, but the problem was the administration rushed this through, and they didn't decide to look at what it actually would do to the marketplace. I mean, we've already had the stories coming out that in Ohio and even in Wisconsin and other states, insurance premiums are skyrocketing. That information actually came out just days before the 2012 presidential election. Didn't have an impact on the outcome, but it did showcase the fact that this is legislation that is going through, that people will pay more at the end of the day. Their plan will be more complex, and the system is untested. I mean, we're dumping millions of Americans on a system that's untested. It's got to be up and running by January 1st, and we have no idea how it's actually going to function in the long term, even in the first 12 months, as in the first year as it unfolds.
Well, we could do hours on Obamacare, and I think we'll have the opportunity to talk about this in several weeks. But I want to go to our resident Milwaukee resident, Collin Roth. This week, Collin, Mayor Barrett and his police chief, Chief Flynn, Ed Flynn, said that the violence they finally reached the tipping point, and they're upset about the violence in the city. But they put the blame squarely on the shoulders of the lawmakers and the governor in Madison, saying we need new gun laws and we need more money. How did that play?
I mean, does this really pass for leadership? Mayor Barrett, Chief Flynn, over a week after really this crime spree started to break with shootings every night and a 14-year-old boy being killed, if it passes for leadership that the elected officials in this city and the police chief blame Madison, saying that this is a policy problem, that's what's going on in Milwaukee is a policy problem, this is absurd. This is not being honest. This is not being truthful. This doesn't address any of the cultural, economic, family issues that are happening in the central city of Milwaukee, and it's not a gun issue. They talk. I was amazed that two liberals would start advocating for mandatory minimum sentences after all we hear about is there's too large a black incarceration problem. Why now is that an issue when the Milwaukee County criminal justice system hasn't been sentencing, hasn't been prosecuting these cases to the mandatory minimums?
Well, and it's worse than that too. If you take into consideration Alderman Bob Donovan, who just earlier this year, I think it was in May, introduced a resolution for I think it was $500,000 or more in additional city money to go to police overtime for a stopgap measure to at least make the streets safer this summer. Shot down by his colleagues. The mayor was silent on the issue. Chief Flynn said, "We have enough cops." Well, now, several murders, several dozen shootings later, and the mayor and his police chief are saying we need more money for overtime, and are completely silent of the fact that their nemesis, Donovan, and the sheriff of Milwaukee County, David Clark, was saying the same thing. David Clark was pretty adamant and pretty forceful about this. That shouldn't surprise anyone, correct, Brian?
No, that shouldn't surprise anyone that Sheriff Clark has been out here, and it's because he has the guts, perhaps, to call this problem what it is. It's not a policy problem; it's a crime problem, and it's a problem that needs to be solved in a number of different facets, in a number of different ways. And you have Mayor Barrett and Police Chief Ed Flynn now calling on Madison and blaming this as if this was a Madison problem. No, this is because Mayor Barrett's Milwaukee is starting to look like Rahm Emanuel's Chicago this summer, and the mayor needs to take ownership for this problem. He needs to be able to provide a solution for how he's going to prevent rising crime rates. They need to take on active roles here in making sure that the police have the resources and the manpower that they need, and that jobs are being created in the city so that people are going to have less of an excuse to be unemployed and out wandering around. You need to, again, as Collin Roth pointed out, solve some of these socioeconomic problems that are prevalent in Milwaukee right now. This isn't just a one-facet solution to the problem. But let's really look at this here. I mean, the mayor immediately began calling for both mandatory minimum sentencing, and then he began pushing for more gun control regulations. Now, this is the same Mayor Barrett who, in his own administration, employs a staffer who's paid for by liberal foundations in Illinois and New York to advance gun policy that mirrors what Mayor Richard Bloomberg wants in New York City. And Media Trackers has emails. We're going to write a story about this next week. We'll offer a teaser of it here at RightWisconsin. But we have emails showing that in the aftermath of some of the terrible shootings here in Wisconsin and then elsewhere across the country, Mayor Barrett used his administration to try to make sure that they could get out talking points that would reflect the Bloomberg ideology in New York, instead of using their administration to try to reach out and to offer consolation to the victims. Instead of trying to actually work with local police and law enforcement, they immediately began behind the scenes politicizing these attacks.
Or doing something to prevent the attacks in the first place. Looking forward to that story from Media Trackers next week, and we'll follow it closely on Right Wisconsin. This is the fastest moment here on radio we like to talk about, even though we're not on radio today. So we're going to keep going here. Let's go to Collin Roth, our resident Detroit Tiger fan. I see that banner in the background of your six-bedroom apartment there in Milwaukee. You guys got dinged by the PED scandal, so it's not just Ryan Braun anymore. What do you think of both what the Major League Baseball did this week and what A-Rod did or did not do this week?
Not a surprise as far as the number of games suspensions, the 50 games for the different players. I think it's probably the right call. I think it's something that needs to be cleaned up. Nobody wants to see this stuff. And what I would like to see from Major League Baseball, and I think they owe it to the fans, is some of the evidence here. All we've seen is some investigative reports out of Miami that show handwritten names on different ledgers and things from Tony Bosch and the Biogenesis Clinic. But I think fans deserve to know what this was. It doesn't appear to be a positive drug test for any of, maybe some of these guys, but maybe not any of them. And so we're in kind of murky waters as fans as to what to know, what to think of it. I guess we take it in good faith that them accepting the suspensions means there was something legitimate there. But
yeah, but I think the fans deserve to know, for example, did Ryan Braun do this 100 times? Did he do it twice? Did he do it 6 times? Did Johnny Peralta do this in the minor leagues? Did he do it before he was even signed to a major league contract? I mean, that impacts the sports. The sport too, and certainly. I think simply just saying these are our penalties, that's it, now we move on. Brian, we don't get away with that in politics. Should they be able to get away with that in sport?
Absolutely not. I mean, Major League Baseball here, as Collin pointed out, they need to make sure they take steps to show people the evidence why did they suspend these players? I mean, is it handwritten notes on a sheet from some sleazy operator in Florida, or is it somebody that actually is there actual tests that prove these players violated the rules? We know there's a performance-enhancing drug problem in Major League Baseball. We know that this is something that needs to be cleaned up, but as Major League Baseball works to solve the problem, they need to make sure they don't create a bigger problem with fans, but not coming forward with the evidence and not showing exactly what steps they took to prove that these players needed to be suspended. And look at it this way. I mean, these players have come out, and now they're being punished and penalized for this, but I do think you have a point there, Brian. They need to explain how many times were performance-enhancing drugs used, and what was the reason for it. Were they trying to enhance performance? Were they trying to speed up recovery from an injury? I mean, those are two very different things if you look at it, and I'm not saying either one is justified under the rules of baseball. But the fans do deserve to know exactly why this is taking place, and that it's actually an operation that's on the up and up, because you can't fight sleaze with sleaze. And I think some people have a bad taste in their mouth for the way Major League Baseball has handled all of this.
And I'll chime in on A-Rod. I think A-Rod playing the rest of the year is an absolute disaster for Major League Baseball. I don't begrudge him for appealing. He's got to do what he's got to do. He has a lot of money tied up in this, but they have. Major League Baseball has a serious problem with A-Rod playing the rest of the year. Who knows what the Yankees will do? They may not make the playoffs.
But if they do, because of his performance, that is, I mean, you're right. I mean, I understand that according to the agreement that the player gets to play during the appeal, but why does the appeal have to go until November before they even have the hearing? I don't get that. Collin, do you understand why they're doing that?
I don't know. From what I've read, it should happen within a couple weeks. Again, we don't know the evidence. We don't know how complex this case is. From what we understand with A-Rod, something has to do with perhaps buying up evidence or obstructing the investigation. But again, he doesn't deny that he used performance-enhancing drugs. He's just looking for a different or a lower suspension or lower penalty. And here he is playing in the rest of the season of 2013 while the rest of these players are out.
Right. Hey, we got to move on here. So let's go to Amazon. Jeff Bezos uses his own money, but he made the money from Amazon. Jeff Bezos buys the Washington Post. This is shortly after John Henry buys the Boston Globe. And the left is all freaked out because the Koch brothers want to buy a newspaper, and the Chicago Tribune may be for sale. What do you make of this, Brian? What do you think this means? Is print dead? Obviously, these billionaires are spending hundreds of millions of dollars to purchase these things. What do you think this means for the future of media, news, political coverage?
Well, I do think these newspapers are looking for a cash infusion, perhaps, and someone who can provide them with a little more financial stability. The numbers do show that newspaper readership, especially those print editions, is declining, and people are turning to alternative forms of media. Here online, they're coming online to look at their look for information and get the news that they want. Television, of course, has been on the rise, and so you have alternative forms of media that are starting to beat out newspapers. But I really found the Washington Post purchase to be fascinating. I mean, here you have the executive of the largest, perhaps one of the largest, the largest internet retailer in the world, coming in and buying up a newspaper, which is perhaps the dinosaur of the media industry.
And a guy who said that print is dead. You know, a guy who bought a German newspaper, German magazine, that print newspapers are dead just a couple of months ago.
And that's what makes this fascinating. I want to see what his strategy is. It's going to be an interesting thing to see. But I do think that a lot of major newspapers, flagship newspapers, are watching events closely to see what their own future holds for them.
Collin, do you think this makes if the Koch brothers buy a daily newspaper, kind of evens it out because you got lefty billionaires buying some, and now some righties may buy some too? You think that'll tamp down the fervor, or will the left just go absolutely,
I would never accuse the liberal media of being hypocrites or having a double standard, but I think this is great. Who better to revive journalism, newspapers, than an online innovator and entrepreneur? I think this is a great person to bring the Washington Post perhaps into the 21st century,
or at least the 20th. Okay, we end every week's Week in Review segment with what do you think is the most undercovered story, which is a really bad. We've got to come up with a better way of explaining this. But the story that didn't get enough attention in the mainstream media, and we'll start with you, Brian. What kind of fell underneath the radar, and maybe people should look for ahead now?
Well, I was fascinated at the state level. I mean, it was a slow week in politics, but the Journal-Sentinel had a blog piece mentioning the fact that Governor Scott Walker did say that he's possibly interested in considering income tax elimination at the state level here in Wisconsin. And looking ahead, there's a lot of things to read into that. One, he's potentially running for president down the road, so he's got to compete with other governors who propose similar ideas. So he wants to get out there and make sure that he's talking about it as well, perhaps. It also spells yet, I think, more potential for the young conservative lawmakers who pushed through an income tax cut this session. So that was kind of an interesting bit of information. I didn't see a lot of people jumping all over, but again, it's summertime. It was State Fair week, so it's a little bit understandable, perhaps, to get out there a little bit more.
Collin, your most undercovered story of the week?
I really liked a story by John McCormick in the Weekly Standard, in which he actually took the opportunity to ask Texas State Senator Wendy Davis what the difference was between the Gosnell murders and the 23-week abortion. And she wasn't even familiar with the details of the Gosnell trial.
She's either lying or she's ignorant.
The very impetus for the law that she stood for 11 hours to oppose. So I thought that was a very fascinating exchange, and just shows what kind of kid glove treatment she's been under.
Yeah, the fact that no one had asked her that question before is just amazing. I'm going to choose one a little closer to home. Paul Ryan is trying to find a solution on the immigration issue, a path forward, set several separate bills, and that has unleashed a torrent of advertising. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, both for immigration reform and against, will be playing out here in Wisconsin against a lawmaker who is completely safe in his seat. But it does show what a thought leader he is in the House of Representatives, that they're trying to influence him, not out of pressure electorally, but actually to change his vote or to influence what happens because of the influence he has in Congress. I think that is fascinating, something that's been definitely undercovered. Gentlemen, I want to thank you for joining us this week. Brian Sikma from Media Trackers, Collin Roth from his apartment in Milwaukee. To be fair, I'm also talking to you from my house in Brookfield, but to be fair, Collin and I were both at work before 7 o'clock this morning, making sure that Right Wisconsin's daily newsletter and content got up in time. Gentlemen, thank you very much, and we will be back again next week for the Right Wisconsin Week in Review.
Exclusive content, insightful analysis. Join the conservatives at RightWisconsin.com.